All right, we are now recording. And without further ado, thank you so much, Councilor Campbell, for being with us today. And the floor is yours.
I should know this by now. I'm on mute. I was on mute. Hi. First of all, thank you, everyone. And it's great to see you all. And Nick, thank you for organizing this. And of course, reaching out to Katie to ensure that this happened. Thank you to everyone on the Zoom. I know how busy folks are. And so I'm really honored that you would take time out of your busy schedules to join the conversation tonight. And of course, to not just learn more about my candidacy, but to ask questions about the issues you care about the most. And so I'll tell folks a little bit about me, why I'm running in this moment in time, and just frankly, the issues I have heard come up over the course of the campaign thus far, and then hopefully use the bulk of time to hear from you guys on the issues you care about the most. Obviously, I'm Andrea Campbell, and I currently actually represent District 4 in the council. This is largely Dorchester, Mattapan. I live in Mattapan with my two beautiful boys and my beautiful and handsome husband. I also represent Jamaica Plain and Rosendale, and I've been on the council for 6 years, working on a whole host of issues: housing, economic opportunity, working to improve our Boston public schools, so many issues, always with the goal of making sure that the systems and services we provide our residents, that those systems are transparent, diverse, equitable, and accountable to the residents we have the honor of serving on the city council and as public servants. My entire life has been connected to this wonderful city. I grew up here. I grew up in Roxbury in the South End. I am a product of Boston Public Schools. I went to 5 of them. All 5 of them were excellent. I graduated Latin school and then went to Princeton University and then UCLA for law school. Then I came all the way back to Roxbury and I started my legal career actually representing students and parents in education cases. I love that work. I've worked as an attorney in the private sector and the public sector, including as an attorney for Governor Deval Patrick. Boston is where I met my husband, where we of course are raising our family in Mattapan. Love the city, but Boston sadly is also where I have experienced tremendous pain and loss. I talk about my twin brother, Andre, all the time because he is the very reason I do this work. This year marks 9 years since he passed away while in the custody of the Department of Correction, which oversees our prisons here in Massachusetts. He was only 29 years old when he passed. He was a pretrial detainee, which meant that he was in custody for 2 years, waiting to go to trial. He never made it because he had a disease called scleroderma. And as a result of receiving inadequate healthcare while in that system, passed away at such a young age. And the question I asked that gave me the courage to run for office in the first place and to enter this political arena, and it is not an easy arena to be in, but the question I asked was, how did 2 twins born and raised in the city of Boston have such different life outcomes? That is the question that gave me that courage to challenge a 32-year incumbent to join the city council. It is the same question that drives my work every single day. It is the same question that is absolutely fueling my run for mayor. Because sadly, both Andre and I lost our mother when we were 8 months old. She died in a car accident going to visit our father, who was incarcerated at the time. Our father was incarcerated for the first 8 years of our lives. So we bounced around living in foster care with relatives. We had incredible instability. Our father gets out of prison when we're 8. We talked to him one morning when we're 19, he died that same evening. I was a sophomore at the time at Princeton and literally talked to my father in the morning, and that same evening he passed away when we were 19 years old. We grew up poor in the city of Boston. We lived in public housing, sometimes affordable housing, and we both attended Boston Public Schools. But instead of graduating from a Boston public school and going off to reach his God-given potential, he would reach or sort of meet that tragic end. What I've come to know to be true is that many of the systems that allowed me to be successful are absolutely the same systems that absolutely failed Andre and sadly continue to fail thousands of Bostonians today. I focus a lot on Boston Public Schools because that is one system I know absolutely failed him. And we all know, and you guys know, how critically important education is. I got job opportunities, excellent academics, great teachers, sports, mentors, you name it, going through Boston Public Schools. My brother, my peers, or many of my peers, and many young people today in the city do not have the same access to those opportunities, whether it is inequities in education, in housing, jobs, neighborhoods that don't have access to transit or good parks, neighborhoods that are just lacking in economic development. All of those inequities are familiar to me growing up in the city. All of those inequities are familiar to the folks I've had the privilege of representing on the council the last 6 years. And sadly, those inequities have existed in the city of Boston for generations. And I've been telling everyone that I think because of COVID-19, because of course, the painful, tragic murder of George Floyd that we all experienced, that we are seeing and experiencing just how deep and debilitating these inequities are. And not just for low-income residents or people of color, but for all of us. And I do think that in the city of Boston, we have a unique opportunity and a moment that I'm not sure we're going to get again anytime soon to address our own painful history of race, segregation, marginalization in this city, and to do the really hard work of eradicating the persistent inequities that exist in our city because of that history. But for that to happen, we need leadership that is not only bold and courageous. I am all of those things, and I have a record of accomplishment that speaks to that, but leadership that understands those inequities, has lived them, and never in a million years did I think I would be able to take a very painful and traumatic story and use it for a purpose that is bigger than me and to help other people in my community. But leadership that also brings people together. These are difficult conversations to have. It is important that we bring together folks across every demographic in every neighborhood. I jumped into this mayor's race back in September when we didn't know what our mayor was going to do. He clearly is gone now, but exercising that courage then to say, I am running for mayor to deliver that leadership in the city of Boston, but frankly, to continue to deliver that leadership in the city of Boston. And from the very beginning, I have been talking about these inequities that exist in our city and saying that people also are experiencing these inequities and wanting and demanding systemic change, especially in our political system. But in the midst of all of those calls for change, there's also this separate narrative in our city that Boston is doing well, that we don't have anything that would warrant policing reform. We don't have anything that would warrant doing anything around race relations. While we are the first in many respects, we have some of the best colleges, we have some of the best medical institutions, some of the best industries in the world. Boston has yet to live up to being the best for every single resident in the city of Boston. And I often say that I cannot accept that living in Mattapan, my two boys have a 5% chance of getting into a high quality Boston public school. Whereas if you live in certain downtown neighborhoods, it is 80%. Or that certain communities don't have access to a good park, don't have access to good transit, don't have access to good education or good colleges, don't have access to so many things they would need to be able to reach their dreams and to be successful. And so I jumped into this race to say we can do something about this. The best thing about the city of Boston is that we have everything it takes to be able to solve for these inequities. We have the human talent, the human capital, the institutions, the resources, you name it, everything you would imagine it would take to be able to solve for these inequities. And so I'm excited for what we've created in this campaign so far. I'm excited with the feedback we are already getting with respect to my candidacy in this campaign. I've been telling folks, it's not just me or people of color or low-income folks that have a stake in this city's future being equitable. All of us have a stake in that. If you are a talented young college student, you want to be able to afford to live in the city of Boston and to stay here and to use your degree to help this city. All of us are taxpayers. We want our money to be used wisely and effectively to solve for these issues and to have an impact in our community. We all care or should care about climate change, but ensuring that every single neighborhood is resilient. We all want crime to go down, not up, and for every neighborhood to feel safe. And I think we all love the city of Boston and want it to work for everyone. I won't sit here and promise you that I am an expert on all the issues. I am not. I do not know everything. I surround myself with good people and people who do know a lot and who know more than me sometimes. What I will promise you is I will always be honest about where we are as a city, where we need to go, I will always lead with integrity, intention, courage, and most importantly, a sense of urgency and action. Of course, to respond to COVID, that is going to be a major responsibility still going forward. But I think we can do that while also eradicating the persistent health inequities that exist in our city. Economic recovery, of course, we can do that, but we can make sure that everyone can fully participate in our economy in ways they haven't been able to in the past. We absolutely can respond to climate, but center communities of color that are bearing the brunt of environmental injustices, because if we don't, that movement will absolutely fail without them. We absolutely can reimagine our policing system in such a way that we root out the racial inequities in that system. We, of course, can make sure that everyone can afford to live here, stay here. And what is near and dear to me, we can make sure that every young person in the city of Boston has access to an excellent education. That is possible in our city. I cannot do it alone. So I'm really grateful that each and every one of you have taken time out of your busy schedules to have a conversation tonight about the issues. Looking forward to answering your questions. I've been telling a whole bunch of people of late, Nick, a lot of people, that I am not afraid of this race. I wasn't afraid back in September. I tell the team, don't get distracted. Don't be looking left and right. Definitely don't look back. Look straight ahead. Stay focused. Do the work, and stay disciplined. And that's exactly what we're doing. So I hope to earn your support in this race, and of course, to answer your questions tonight. So thank you all so very much.
Thank you so much, Councilor Campbell. And I already knew after looking into your whole history and everything, and after hearing you speak today, you've definitely got nothing to be afraid of in this race at all.
Thank you.
The way you can, I'm just so floored by the way you can include everybody in the city in your vision of the way the city is going to move forward. And that's just absolutely incredible to me. So now we'll move into our question and answer session. First question I've got is from Isabel DePina, who anyone at UMass Boston knows that name because she has been so involved in everything on campus. And honestly, probably half of the people in the city know her name because she is just an incredible activist. And so her question will be relating to development that will be or is planned for the Dorchester area. So without further ado,
Looking around so I can see. I'm expanding my screen so I can see everyone. Hi, Isabel.
Hi, how you doing today? My name is Isabel DePina, and I am a senior for Labor Studies and Conflict Resolution, MBA. I am an acting president of a public higher education network of Massachusetts. So my question is, as you know, UMass is leasing a former exposed center land that Accordia is proposing to develop as Dorchester Bay City, which they are claiming will be another Kendall Square. Like Kendall Square, Dorchester Bay City will raise rents and living costs. Among the many negative impacts it will have on Dorchester communities of color and other working class residents. If you are an elected mayor of Boston, what will you do to prevent this kind of gentrification and displacement of working class communities? How would you assure that the development in Boston is driven by the needs and the voice of the communities of color instead of the development interests that drive it now?
Thank you for the question. And I'm following that project, although it's technically outside my current district, right? But I'm following it and hearing concerns and pushing, right, for it to be available to and affordable to folks who desperately need housing, right? But going forward, we actually just released a housing plan this morning. Let me tell you, we engage a whole host of folks. I think I looked at 8 versions before we released it. But some of the things that are in it that address issues of gentrification, displacement, affordability. Number one is just intentionality. The city has a lot of power to determine what we build. And over the last, say 6 or 7 years, right, 6 years since I've been on the council, there's been a lot of market rate development, studios or 1 bedrooms even. and not necessarily enough affordable units, enough home ownership opportunities. I think it's really important that as we build more affordable units, and we can set the AMI in such a way that these units are at pricing points that folks can absolutely afford. But I think home ownership is critically important. We know if you own a home, you're more likely to be able to stay in the city of Boston. So we can create more affordable housing opportunities just by what we build, intentionality. The second is making sure we have resources to be able to build more affordable housing in the city of Boston. My first piece of legislation on the Community Preservation Act was on the council was the Community Preservation Act. And I took a lot of heat for that. It was my first year in the council. Technically, the CPA is a tax initiative. So I got emails all day, some angry phone calls saying, how dare you start your career with this piece of legislation? And I pushed back. I said, this is powerful. This piece of legislation can give us tremendous resources to deal with our housing crisis. The city council just reviewed $25 million for CPA projects. The CPA is generating millions of dollars every single year because of a coalition that came together to get that passed. And so for me, it's continuing to make sure that CPA dollars go to affordable housing units, affordable housing homeownership opportunities, but also continuing to think about legislative tools, expanding IDP, doing more with linkage to make sure that those resources go to affordable housing projects. In addition, I do think we got to get creative. We've been talking a lot about land trusts in the city of Boston. These are great tools to be able to ensure that not only are folks able to afford this place to live, but that the community owns this. And this has been, there are some examples already now in the city of Boston. Other municipalities in the country have been doing this. So in my housing plan, I talk about how the city of Boston can do better to support these land trust models and to make sure ownership is with community and empower the people that we're trying to serve, give them the power and control over their land, ways in which to do that. And one other creative tool is vacant lots. I know it doesn't sound sexy, but I call it my vacant lot initiative. I've been working on this for years. And I discovered the city of Boston has hundreds of city-owned vacant lots. I'm like, cut the red tape and the bureaucracy and give this land away to community or others, even some small developers, right? Women and people of color who live in our community, who could be able to develop affordable housing and also use it as an opportunity to close the racial wealth gap for many of these businesses. So I think Katie might put my plan in the chat. I hope to continue the conversation with you, Isabel, because there's a lot in there. That could be a whole Zoom, but those are just ways in which I think about it. But there's absolutely a way to keep this city affordable for the people who live here and to help people also move into homeownership opportunities along the way.
Thank you, but we do have a teaching coming up. I would love for you to come, and I'll send you the link. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your advocacy in the community.
Yeah, and Methadone Maya, don't forget.
Oh, no, I'm not. So I was just talking with Dominguez about this.
You don't want me to start. You don't want me to start. Don't let me start, okay, please.
Okay, this is wonderful. I was just on with a constituent about this very issue, the other public health crisis that needs to be dealt with. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Councilor Campbell, for your excellent answer to that question. Thank you, Isabel, because you always come with the most hard-hitting, awesome questions. So for our next question, this one was submitted by Sarah, who's a member of UMB College Democrats and in a couple classes with me. So glad to have her here tonight. She was asking about what you think about the expansion of charter schools in the city of Boston and about resource use in the Boston public schools and tackling racial disparities in the BPS school system.
Thank you. Was it Sarah, Nick, who asked the question?
Yep, exactly.
Thank you, Sarah, for the question. Well, first of all, I don't see charter schools expanding in the city of Boston anytime soon. I think the focus for me and many others is improving Boston public schools so our families don't have to go somewhere else. And I just want to put this in some further context. I think every single family in the city of Boston wants to choose and go to Boston Public Schools. In my current district, the reality is there are many families that do not have access to a high quality Boston Public School. And I used the example earlier in my opening remarks about my two boys. I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and they have a 5% chance of getting into a high quality BPS school. I just found out yesterday that my soon to be 4-year-old got selected for a K1 seat. And I literally have the document. I've been showing it to everyone. It says, congratulations. And while I was happy to receive it, because as a BPS kid, I want my boys to go to BPS, I also got a little emotional because I know the reality is it's the luck of the lottery, that a lot of families did not get this letter and instead got a waiting list. And so then they have to find something. And if they don't find a BPS option, they have to look for charter schools or some MECO or something else. I think there's a way in which to improve Boston Public Schools so every family has access to early ed. And we know that is critically important. Someone just told me just in the last Zoom that I was on, 80% of our brain development is before you are 2 years old. And yet the city of Boston is responding with educational services for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. No, let's make sure our families have access to pre-K starting at birth, to programs that they need for their children. We can do that in the city of Boston. We can redesign our high schools to root out the inequities that exist there. Right now, there are some high schools that are under-resourced, have old school infrastructure, do not have the partnerships they need to serve their students, do not have the human capital. And that's unfair. And I went to Boston Latin School. I love Latin School. They got a lot. Other schools do not. And if we want to be able to meet the needs of low-income families, particularly our special needs students, our English language learners, we are going to have to resource our schools equitably, which we're not currently doing, but we can. And we're also going to have to redesign our high schools in such a way that we're creating pathways for our young people into their dreams and into the jobs they want. And right now we're not doing that well, but there's a way in which to transform this system so that we do. I could go on and on, Sarah. I know Katie's putting things in the chat, but there's more work to do, but I'm passionate about it, and I've put out several plans over the years. So I hope you'll take a look.
Thank you so much for your answer to that question. Obviously, as people go to a public institution of higher education, public ed is at the top of our minds constantly. So really glad to hear your stance on those issues. Our next question is also going to be about public education and about education policy as well. But we're shifting now to a question about higher education. To ask that question, I will allow Matthew Rayod, a good friend of mine, to unmute himself and ask a question. Okay. The floor is yours, Matt.
Hi, Councilor. How are you?
I don't see you. Oh, hi. I hear you. There you go. Hi.
So my question is, how are you going to help bridge the obvious gap between public and private universities, specifically the negative press that public universities face in Boston compared to the private ones, all because they're public?
Thank you so much for the question. I will tell you that public ed institutions, I have actually done incredible work with as a counselor. These are the institutions, frankly, that are easier to get into, to be able to get research done in my district, interns, the human capital support I would need to frankly be effective as a counselor. So I've always celebrated our public institutions. But the thing that I think in the city of Boston, and frankly with the platform that the mayor has, and if I'm blessed to become the next elected mayor in the city of Boston, I will be saying this on that platform, there is no way private institutions of higher ed will be able to meet the needs of our city or our country. We have to invest in our public institutions for different reasons. One, the economy, the workforce. The public institutions are the institutions that are generating and producing, as you guys all know, talented leaders now and of the future, but also in terms of the numbers, more. The private institutions just don't receive enough students to be able to do that. In addition, public institutions are always available to our students and folks who need access to education, and they don't get to be able to let's just say they make it easier in terms of the barriers that stand in the way. And that's important to me because I have a lot of folks currently in my district, and I know in the city of Boston, maybe they have quarries because they've been formerly incarcerated. Maybe they've lost their job and they're older and they're now looking for a new career and they need an opportunity and they need new training. Public ed institutions are standing up and have been for years. We should be celebrating that. We should be lifting that up. We should be naming the importance of these institutions to our economy. And if they are not resourced and supported, we will all be in trouble. And then we need to be putting our money where our mouth is, pushing the state to be investing in these institutions, doing something about tuition fees, right? Not putting it on the backs of students. I have gotten so many different calls from students over the years talking about, yes, invest, but don't require us to always be the ones to pay. The state needs to be offering up more investment. There's a way using this platform to push the state to do just that. There's also a way, of course, to support students as well in the process. I just saw pop up cancel student debt. Yes, there are different ways we can incentivize our people to come into public ed institutions, to continue to expand their skill set so they can reach their dreams. And there's ways to do all of that in supporting students. But I do think the most important and pressing issue is pushing the state, the federal government, and the city to offer more resources for these institutions and not to do it on the backs of students through fees or other costs. And so I will keep pushing that. I will tell you, I have many students and staff that currently live in my current district, I should say, who are champions for higher ed institutions that are public, and I will continue to do the same and be the same, a champion for all of you guys. So thank you, Matthew, for the question.
Thank you so much, Councilor
Thank
Campbell.
you.
That's something that we've been asking ourselves a lot of, how to improve UMass Boston's image specifically, but how to address that gap between the public and private institutions in our city. So our next question is going to be from a new face, Andrew, who will be asking a question about zoning policies outside the city of Boston, how they affect the city.
Hi, good evening, Councilor. So like Nick was saying, I just want to go back to housing for a minute. I just wanted to hear what your thoughts were about zoning reform, specifically single family zoning. Because I know cities like Newton are looking at easing up zoning laws to promote more housing options. And I just want to know what kind of zoning reforms you may implement if you were mayor.
Thank you, Andrew, for the question. It's a critical one. As we talk about needing more affordable housing, what we're finding is it can be really difficult if you have a project that community is like, yes, we want that because they have affordable units at pricing points we can afford. How long it takes to build that project. So the processes can be overwhelming and it can take a really long time. And so we do need to streamline processes, cut red tape and bureaucracy, and particularly for projects that we know community wants and desperately needs. And that is not only affordable housing. And in my housing plan, I actually speak to this a little bit about moving some of the affordable housing projects out of Article 80 processes, which can be long, and pushing it into maybe ISD or another agency to deal with. In addition, when you talk about homeownership opportunities, which goes back to Isabel's question, everyone can say these are affordable homeownership opportunities. Well, it shouldn't take so long to build. So there's a way in which to change zoning laws. Don't get me wrong, can take a while. But I think if you're pushing as a collective, and especially using the platform in the mayor's office, it can make it easier to build single family homes, 2-family homes as well, which is critically important because we do have to be more intentional on building housing for families. And we're just not doing that well in the city of Boston. And zoning changes are critical to that.
Thank you. I'm a student at UMass Boston. I'm actually a town meeting member in Dedham nearby. I know there's
good to know.
Yeah, there's actually some talk about potential zoning reform in town, but obviously it's a controversial issue. I think like reform in Boston could inspire nearby towns like Dedham. So I hope some of these reforms can get done.
I appreciate you saying that because someone recently said, you know, where Boston goes, many other municipalities follow. So we do have the ability to lead and to be bold and courageous, which does make it easier for other municipalities to follow. And let me tell you, when it comes to housing and other issues, a regional approach is going to be critical. Even on transportation and other issues, there's no way Boston alone can solve it, but we can lead the way. So thank you. And good for you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you so much for your answer on that question, Counselor. That's anyone who knows anything about me knows I'm obsessed with housing policy. So glad to hear your stance on that one. So our next question is from my friend Katie, who is asking about LGBTQ plus rights in Boston. She specifically asks, what will you do to protect LGBTQ plus rights in Boston, particularly same-sex adoption rights that the Trump administration attacked during the past? And how we can continue to protect this now and in the future in more hostile administrations.
What was the name, Nick, of the person who asked the question?
That was Katie. Sorry, I think I forgot to say it.
Katie, I should know I have a Katie in my life. So Katie, thank you so much for your question. This is critical. Actually, early on, hosted a couple of events that were specifically about the LGBTQ community and really listening to where the city could do better. On the adoption specific policy, clearly we can do better in terms of advocacy. Again, it goes back to this platform that we have that frankly, as a mayor of the city of Boston, you can call a press conference every day and people will show up. And there are moments when we need to stand up and show up, right? And this is one of them. Or even when we were talking about folks being deported, or what's currently happening on the border and still happening on the border with respect to our youth and young people. This platform is where we can show up. And so I do think specifically that issue that you raised, it's not, first of all, I'm showing up now, but just really emphasizing the power of that platform and that bully pit at the mayor's level. But in general, for this community, I think it's a few different things. One, data. This has been coming up quite a bit. When we talk about inequities in education or bullying or other things that we see in our school environments, it's really difficult to get a sense of how folks in the LGBTQ community or those who identify are being treated without data. Policing reform, we have been talking about policing reform for a really long time, but we know that transgender Black women are being murdered, right, and killed, harassed. This community in particular, LGBTQ community as a whole, and yet there's no data that pinpoints the magnitude of that problem. That's something where the city of Boston can be leading the way. When you talk about housing and discrimination, LGBTQ community is at the top of the list in terms of being discriminated against, just like Black residents and our Asian brothers and sisters, just like the Latino and Latinx community. And yet there's no data on that. When we talk about healthcare costs, when I was developing my public health plan, I was shocked to learn that the LGBTQ community pays more in terms of healthcare coverage and is often disproportionately affected when it comes to access issues. And so there's a way in which to solve for these issues if we get data and define the magnitude of the problem and are very intentional in defining the problem. And data is critically important. The city of Boston can lead the way in doing that. Responding with thoughtful policy. And much of the policy I have put out already, it does that. It names how we have to be more intentional with this particular demographic. That is important to me. In addition, hire folks from the community. We often talk about the importance of having representation. And I'm not talking about on a volunteer basis. Hire folks who are living the experience, who are representative of the community, I think is critically important in every space in city government. And so I believe wholeheartedly inclusivity, but I think also looking at who forms up a cabinet, who are the leaders in the city of Boston, who is running various departments, what does that look like? I think representation matters, and I think hiring is also critically important. And then lastly, I will say cultural competency. There are a lot of departments, and particularly in the policing context, where you could tell there's some awareness issues and language issues and an understanding that is lacking. And so it's incumbent upon city leadership to make sure that folks understand this community, understand the problems and concerns, but also have a cultural competency as well. Thank you for that question.
Thank you so much for answering that. It's great to hear that about your plans on building such an inclusive city, and that seems to be something that you're really working on. So I'm very glad to hear about that specific aspect of your plan. Right. Our next question was from Erica, who asked me to ask her question for her as well. Sorry, let me find that question again. Alrighty. So Erica was asking a question we kind of alluded to earlier when Isabel was talking about dealing with the issue of homelessness and on Methadone Mile. So Erica was asking, what is your overall plan on helping out the homeless population on Methadone Mile? She works around there, and it's very concerning for her what she sees around her workplace.
It is concerning, and it's concerning for me too. I actually grew up on Mass Ave. So I said the South End earlier. I grew up on Mass Ave, right down the street from the particular sort of where it's concentrated, even though we know the issue is spilling out into other neighborhoods by the TD Garden, of course, some of our downtown neighborhoods. But I didn't have to worry about picking up needles as a little girl growing up in the South End, my playground being unsafe, my school being unsafe, or people laying on the ground and you didn't know if they were dead or alive. And that's what we have currently in the city of Boston. And that is absolutely unacceptable. It's unacceptable because we have everything it takes to solve for the issues. Don't get me wrong, it's a hard one, right? There are some folks who may not be ready for recovery. We have to understand that. Okay, but do we just stop, right? No. So what I did early on was engage a lot of folks who've been doing the work for some time in that area and many other areas. And I found that they were overwhelmed because no one was taking the lead, no one was organizing a response. This is where the city of Boston must lead. And so in the plan, and Katie, I'm sure we'll put it in the chat, I talk about hiring a chief. I call it a mass and cast chief, but really someone to own this issue, not a million other things, but a public health professional who has a record of accomplishment in building and coordinating teams, who has some experience in recovery, who knows what they're doing to be able to coordinate all of these folks who are doing the hard work on the ground. And then to have what I call a responder unit. Have a unit that is made up not just of first responders, but of public health professionals, mental health coaches, recovery specialists, folks who work in supportive housing, which is critically important. Substance use disorder, homelessness, it's all interconnected, along with domestic violence, frankly. A lot of folks who are homeless, one of the driving causes is domestic violence. All of these issues are connected. Supportive housing is critical. There's some units available now that we should be making sure that people have access to. We clearly need to be building more supportive housing. And in the plan, I also talk about just the need for being creative again. It goes back to the housing conversation around our vacant lots. Right now, I have a project that is being utilized to respond to the issue of homelessness. One of those projects in vacant lots is being used to build supportive housing for folks who are dealing with homelessness. So there's a way to do this quicker and faster to meet the need and to respond. And lastly, I will just add, we were able to set up incredible infrastructure when COVID first started, and do it in such a way that people could have a place to go to quarantine, could have somewhere to go to learn more about if they were affected by COVID. We can do the same to deal with what we're seeing mass and cast in other neighborhoods. We can set up immediate infrastructure for people to go, to use the bathroom, for example, to get some support or have a place to sleep, because no one should be homeless or laying on the street dealing with these issues. So there's a lot in the plan. I'm very passionate about it because what I recognize is this public health crisis existed before COVID-19. And there's a way in which the city can be responding in a more impactful way. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much for your response to that question. It's obviously a horrifying issue, the issue of homelessness, and something we're all too familiar with within the city. Our next question will come from Richard, who I know always comes with excellent questions. He's asking a question about protecting marginalized communities in our city. So I'll give the floor to Richard to ask his question.
Hi, Councilor. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
As everyone is aware, and as we've pretty well established tonight, this pandemic has ravaged our communities deeply on an economic level. People have lost their jobs and a lot of small businesses are hurting right now. But this recession is different from the previous ones in the sense that it's hurting women more than men. The pandemic has hurt areas like the healthcare sector, the education sector, the hospitality industry, all of which are overrepresented by women. So I was wondering how you have addressed and how you will continue to address these economic disparities to protect women, including women of color, as well as other economically vulnerable populations.
Thank you, Richard, for the question. An ally in the work. I love it. I love everything you just lifted up about women, but especially women of color. So thank you for that question. A whole host of ways. In my last Zoom, I'm zooming through the world, as you can imagine. That's why I have to wear these glasses, by the way, because if I don't, I will go blind. I've never worn glasses in my life, but I now have to wear them. Keeping it real, so because I'm zooming through the world. But in my last conversation, there was a lot of a conversation on education, but particularly early ed and childcare. And this is one of the reasons many women in record numbers are also leaving the workforce in the midst of COVID. And there's been some federal dollars directed to municipalities to respond. And so one is closing the gap on early ed, pulling in more employers, which employers actually want to do. I've been just, the silver lining in some of the dark times we're in is that employers are stepping up and recognizing how critically important it is to invest in childcare. And this is a way to get women back to work, because the traditional role is that women will take care of the kids, right? And so they're leaving the workforce. Invest in early ed. In the industries you're naming, invest in those industries where we know women are overrepresented and want to go back to. I actually just put out a restaurant plan because this came up in a whole host of conversations with restaurant owners, food truck owners, some food truck owners that are actually turning their trucks into restaurants. So put out a plan on ways in which to support this industry right now and to support them in the future, because it is they offer low barrier employment opportunities for women and people of color. But coupled with supporting and helping industries where women are overrepresented, including in childcare, for example, and supporting those business owners and our family providers, there's a whole host of industries we can do that for. But then there are some industries that may not come back ever or won't bounce back quickly. And this is where we need to be thinking creatively about the jobs that are online or jobs of the future. There are a lot of new companies in the city of Boston, whether it's in tech, biotech, who are thinking outside the box. Some have actually expanded really quickly because of recent, the payroll protection program. I was just reading an article about Numerated. That was a small company. Now it's a huge company because of the technological tools they use that are now being used because of this federal program, and they're hiring. And I'm like, they're based in Boston? I couldn't believe it. I literally circled this in the magazine because I never heard of them before. There are other employers that we could ask to be intentional in creating high impact training programs to be targeted for women and people of color, push them to give a living wage. This also has to be talked about. We already know the numbers in terms of women and women of color who are not making what they should compared to men. We can change that. We can lead the way in pushing industries to do just that and to offer benefits for women, all of that. And so there are many in the private sector who want to play a role in helping folks come back, but who, especially because of the social justice lens, want to help people of color and women. And I think the city needs to be thinking about how to maximize these types of public-private partnerships for our purposes and to meet the needs of our residents. And then lastly, I'll say we have a lot of incredible women who are entrepreneurs. Maybe they left an industry behind, but they got skill sets. Let's invest in them. Many of them probably want to start a business of their own. How do we give them the capital, the technical assistance, the mentorship, everything they would need to be able to start a business in the city of Boston, start a business in their neighborhood, which of course would give jobs to people who live in their neighborhood. I live in Mattapan. I have nothing wrong with Dunkin' Donuts, but I want a coffee shop that's open past 4 o'clock that's owned by someone who is local. We can't do that here. We can't have more than one. And so there's a way to think outside the box in creating new entrepreneurs in our city. And we can be encouraging that and incentivizing that. And so I'm really excited for all the possibilities sorry, this could be a whole separate Zoom. I know, Nick, you're probably like, I got to get to the next question. So thank you, Richard, for the question.
Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Counselor, for your answer on Richard's question. Richard's been asking the most amazing questions, so I wanted to make sure we definitely got to him. All right, so this may be our last question because I definitely want to give your campaign some time to talk to the students about different opportunities in the campaign. So next we will have Jake, who is the chair of a committee in USG and is also running for student trustee. And he's going to ask a question about MBTA subsidies.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, Jake.
I wanted to ask because currently students who are attending colleges in the Boston area are only given an 11% discount on MBTA passes. Our student body took the initiative and passed a referendum a couple years ago that increased that discount to 50%. But the only way to do that was to pass the burden on to all the students. So we had to tack on another fee to our tuition, which is just unfortunate. So I'm wondering, do you have any plans of working with the MBTA to kind of make it more accessible for college students in the Boston area?
Yes and yes. And you know, it's like the hidden fees of a credit card or your bank statement where you have to look closely and you're like, wait a minute, something's not right here. And I see that frequently, sort of passing on those costs. It goes back to the question earlier, I think that Matthew had around, you know, how do we get the state, for example, to invest more in your university without putting it on the backs of students, right? And so the short answer is yes and yes. And we put together a really, I think, thoughtful transportation plan. Maybe it doesn't specifically address this, but it came up along the way. And also making sure that other modes of transportation by the T were made free to incentivize folks to use the T too. So yes and yes. And thank you for that question. And we'll continue to stay in contact with you guys on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. So I will now, if you'd like to make some closing remarks, I'd like to give you a little time to make some closing remarks because I know that you got lots of places to be. You're very busy person.
And I'll let Katie.
And I know that Katie will be presenting to students after your closing remarks about jobs and internship opportunities. So everyone stay tuned after we get the counselor's closing remarks. So I will now leave you the floor now.
Thank you, Nick. And thank you all for the thoughtful discussion tonight. I will tell you, like I said at the beginning, I don't have all the answers to every issue. I listen, I take ideas and feedback, and I use them. And I firmly believe that those who are living the problems or the issues or experiencing them also have the solutions. I believe in centering residents, students, creating a space that is indeed inclusive and collaborative. And so that won't change. And so I hope to earn your support in this race. If I've already earned it, thank you so much. But I hope to earn your support in this race. I do want to turn it over to Katie to talk about all the incredible things we have available if you want to get more involved in this campaign. If you want to be on this team, and it is a team, there's no top-down approach here. It's a team effort. And so I'll let her share more, but I hope to earn your support. And I'm going to turn it over to Katie.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having us tonight. Really excited to be here. So as Andrea said, you know, we'd love for this to be just the beginning of you guys talking to the campaign. So I put Andrea's email, my email, if you have additional questions or thoughts as you decide who you want to support in this race, or if you want to get more involved, those are our emails. You can read more about some of Andrea's other plans, because I know we got through so many awesome topics, but there's still so many other issues facing the city of Boston. So feel free to learn more about Andrea and her vision. You know, we have an incredible fellowship program. Kate on here, I'm going to shout her out because she helps as one of our kind of head fellows lead our students for Andrea. So if you're interested in getting involved, you could also reach out to Kate, who obviously is an active member. Exactly. So
thank you, Kate.
She could get y'all set up there, but definitely, you know, as we grow this team and grow this campaign, would love to stay in contact with you all. We also have tons of volunteer opportunities coming out. Signature papers come out this month. So if you're a registered voter in Boston, you're willing to sign Andrea's signature papers, please let me know, because we'd love to be able to count on your signature to get Andrea on the ballot. We do bi-weekly phone banks, virtual house parties. So if you want to host a house party with some of your other friends, maybe from other schools or who live in Boston, if you live locally, or from here, definitely want to make sure we're continuing to get the word out and be in community virtually in a safe way. So would love to just hear from you guys and stay in touch. And hopefully Andrea and our team will earn your vote over the next 6 months.
Thank you so much to the both of you for coming and for presenting all this wonderful information. I will make sure to collect all this information. I might be shooting you an email after the event today to get all this information email out to all our College Democrats members. Thank you, Councilor Campbell, for coming and speaking to us. It really was an honor to have you here today.
Oh, no, it's the honor. Please. Thank you guys. I can take these glasses off, by the way. But no, thank you guys so very much. I really appreciate it. And like I said, I hope to earn your support. Definitely follow up with us, Nick, with all the information. And thank you for organizing this. It doesn't happen by accident. So thank you, Kate. Thank you as well. And everyone stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lastly, I will like to thank my officers, my VP Farine Khan, my communications director Bruno Ferreira, my treasurer Claire Sparadolasi, and my secretary Ashley Pierce for putting in all the hard work. Also to some members who were just really exceptional on this specific event. Isabella De Medeiros and Isabella Pereira and Connor McMahon, who couldn't be here today, but they all put in a lot of hard work to make this event a reality. So thank you guys. Thank you to the campaign, and I hope you all have a wonderful night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.